So yes, please share your screen, Maddie.
Wonderful.
You might have to stop sharing first.
Yes, I did.
Oh, great. All right, can everybody see the slides okay?
Yes, looks good.
Great. So thank you so much for having me. Disability justice is one of my very favorite things to talk about. And I could talk about it for a long time. So I'll try to keep track of my time today. But today I just wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of theory behind disability justice, and then also how it impacts health, and how I've thought about disability from a lot of different ways, which I hope will come across in this presentation. And I'll also talk a tiny bit about my path to becoming a Rotary Global Scholar and what I hope to do, or my vision for that at the end. So talking a little bit about myself, my brother that you can see in this photo, he also has a twin sister who is next to me, and then there's my brother in front. My brother has autism, was diagnosed in about 2002. And ever since then, he's always been, I've been very close to all of my siblings. And he's always been a connection to me with the disability world and understanding not only, the challenges that can come with having a diagnosis itself, but the discrimination that can happen when someone appears differently in our world. So ever since I was a kid, I've always wanted to try to, my dream as a little kid was trying to make a better world for my brother. And I thought that the only way I could do that was by becoming a neuroscientist and curing autism totally. I thought that was the only way to get rid of all the discrimination or the bad things that my brother was facing from others. But so that kind of motivated me to get into science, and all throughout high school I studied that. Then when I came to Duke in 2017, I took a class called Disability Studies, Disability and Representation. And that class totally changed my perspective on what disability actually means. So of course, disability can be something that people find hard just in itself. It can definitely impact people's lives just by the physical limitations that it causes. But even more than that, disability causes a whole experience of discrimination from others. And for a lot of people with disabilities, it seemed like through that class, people with disabilities are proud of some of the benefits that come along with disability, and some of the things they couldn't even imagine who they would be if they didn't have autism. For example, if my brother didn't have autism, I think he would be a totally different person. And part of that is then to allow people with disabilities to have pride of those good things that they can share with the world, and to help get the world to adjust more to accommodate these people, rather than saying we need to get rid of all disability. Maybe we can find a way that will work for people with disabilities to be integrated in society. So after I took that class, I decided, well, I don't know if I can be a neuroscience major anymore, because what I've learned now here is so different. It seems like this path was meant for me. But the only problem was disability studies does not exist at my school. So thankfully at Duke, we have a program where you're allowed to, with over a year's effort and lots of research, to propose your own study of a major. So that's what I did. I partnered with some really amazing professors at Duke and got together classes where I could study disability as not only as a medical issue, but also as an identity issue. And during that time, I also decided to go to Chile for 1 semester abroad. Some photos of that are here. And during that time, I continued working with people with disabilities. I was working in a home for children with disabilities who have high medical complex care needs. And while I was there, I recognized, I got close to one of the doctors there, and she was telling me how there was a lack of prioritization of these people in their healthcare system. And that's honestly why that home for people with disabilities hired her, was because when they sent them to the public medical care centers, they often got worse care because they were not being prioritized as much as if they had hired somebody to be a resident doctor in that facility. So during that, I recognized a few values that were kind of similar in the US to how do we prioritize people's value here. And that made me really interested in the idea of global disability inclusion and health, which is why I proposed a program to go as a Rotary Global Scholar and go back to Chile to continue studying that, which I'll talk a bit more about later. But first of all, what is disability studies? You might be wondering, since that is my major. I created it at Duke, but it had already existed for a long time. It's actually been growing a lot, and many schools already do have disability studies. So when I was at Duke, I sort of had to reinvent the wheel in a way, because disability studies takes a lot of insight from areas like Hispanic studies or African American studies, is looking at disability as a critical study of identity, culture, and history, in addition to the medical or physical aspects of what a disability can be. And an important part of that is thinking about ableism, which is like discrimination based on having a disability. And I'm not sure if this is one of the videos that I had recommended for people to watch before this. I wanted to see if maybe I could share it, and if people haven't seen it. Would that be something you all would like to do? It's just a 30-second video.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, great. I might have to reshare my screen so I can share my audio. Can you all still see the screen?
Yes,
With disability as identity?
yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. So this video is from a movie that I watched that was really impactful for me and changing how I thought about disability. It's about a guy named DJ Savarese. He was the first nonverbal autistic individual to graduate from college, and he writes poetry. So this is a short video of one of his poems that was illustrated by another person that was shown in his movie. One moment, I might just pull it up on my computer really quick.
Round and round and round they roll, voices blurred by the pulsating beat and metallic whir of wheels on wood. My fellow kindergartners, curly-haired Nikki and half-grinning Julia, Austin in his baseball cap, and Lisa of the trampoline. Deej, they squeal, a kind of moving sun, hands joined, reaching, stretching, hoping to add me to their ray. They don't see autism yet, don't know that I've been included.
So there is one of my favorite of his poems. I'm going to switch back. And what really sticks out to me about that poem is the idea in disability studies that disability doesn't have to be just a limitation that people are ashamed of, but can be something that brings its own benefits. For example, one of Deej's quotes is that he thinks that poetry is inherently autistic, where that means that you're looking at the world in a different way. And I think in this poem that kind of shows that he really wouldn't have been able to write this poem if he hadn't been autistic. And it kind of shows through this act of like creating art and poetry based on your disability. It shows that disability can be an identity and not just a, like a medical issue, which is why I really like it. And I recommended a book of his poetry at the end, if any of y'all are interested. So going along with that, a lot of people might say, might highly recognize, people with disabilities who are famous in our society, like Stephen Hawking or Temple Grandin, and even Frida Kahlo. She was actually a wheelchair user, and she painted from her wheelchair using adaptive painting methods as well towards the end of her life. And Temple Grandin, if you don't know, she is a woman who created an invention that really revolutionized cattle raising, where it's kind of a machine that hugs the cattle to help them calm down. And that idea, she said, she got herself from the idea from being a woman with autism. She really appreciates tight hugs and pressure rather than maybe light touch or things that are more unpredictable. And so that was something where her disability was directly informing her contributions to the world. So this slide I'm bringing up is a lot of the times disability can, while it definitely can have challenges, also brings knowledge that our world really benefits from. Another example is that that you might not know is that both texting and video chat came from people with disabilities who were deaf. Deaf people invented texting and were a strong influence on the invention of video chat, because through video chat, then they can use their hands to sign with each other. And that's something that we all use every day, which goes to show that accessibility is something that everybody can benefit from. It doesn't have to be something that, someone might be ashamed of receiving in extra help, but it's actually something that everybody can use. For example, a ramp is something, maybe if you hurt your foot or you're pregnant or you're carrying a heavy box, people love to use ramps, even if you're not a person who uses a wheelchair. And there's a lot of other examples too. So that kind of shows that disability affects everybody and accessibility is for everyone. 15% of the world at least has a disability, and most people are going to know someone who has a disability or become themselves disabled. If you're lucky, you'll grow old and you'll be disabled at some point in your life. So we all are touched by disability issues. And one just interesting thing that I like is the idea of universal design, which is the idea that infrastructures can be made for all people to use without having to create either segregated or separate accommodations for specific people. One example might be this set of stairs that you can see here that has a ramp embedded into it, where people with disabilities and without disabilities can use the same entrance to get in. Even thinking in itself, having a separate entrance for people with disabilities in a way can be problematic and in itself segregating of people with disabilities from our society. So the idea of universal design is something that's really interesting to me. It definitely has, it's definitely an idealist standard. If, for example, even within the world of disability, certain things might be good for one person with a disability and difficult for others. For example, putting those bumps on the curb cuts that you use to cross the road, those are really helpful for blind people so they can feel that the road is coming up. But for people with a wheelchair, that can be difficult because it causes extra turbulence in the road. That's just one example, but still the idea of universal design is a really good standard to look up to and to strive for. And it helps to conceptualize disability in a different way. So thinking of that, this is kind of there's 3 different types of models of disability that I'll talk about right now that are kind of based on what I've just talked about. You could get to them. The first one, which is the predominant model right now, is the biomedical model, where disability is thought of as something kind of like a physical impairment or disease of your own body. And that is the thing that's causing difficulty. And it should be something that should be fixed or gotten rid of if at all possible. And while a lot of people have benefited from the field of medicine and will gladly go and receive treatment, and some people with disabilities do want to be cured, for other people with disabilities, they might think that a model like this that dominates our society causes them to think that they are not accepted the way that they are. They would have to change to not have a disability for society to accept them, which is in contrast with the next model, which is a social model of disability that was brought up around the 1980s. It was mostly by people with physical impairments, like wheelchair users, who said that disability, more than a physical impairment, is the inability of our society to integrate people with disabilities. One example might be glasses. I think I see, actually, many of you all are wearing glasses today, and I don't think that we would consider people with glasses today as disabled. But if we didn't have glasses, then imagine what life might be like, and maybe we would consider people with glasses as disabled if we didn't have that accommodation. So that is another way of thinking about disability, where if we could accommodate everyone's different needs, like with universal design, then would disability really even exist? That is a really interesting and newer model that's generally considered to be more positive or more empowering for people with disabilities. However, that model has also been criticized because there's plenty of things about disability that really are hard intrinsically, like people who have chronic pain. It's hard to say, you know, having chronic pain, you can't really create accommodation to get rid of it. It's still there, and it still affects your life. So people have created a lot of other models of disability, such as there's political models, there's social, psychological models, identity model, that are all just different ways to think about and explain disability. But these 2 that I talked about are kind of the main ones that are brought up and talked about today, and thinking about disability justice and how it means. One other aspect that's really important is the idea of disability pride. And that's something that the social model has kind of brought around, is the fact that people with disabilities should be proud of their identity as people with disabilities and their identities of who they are. People with disabilities are just as diverse, and they have just as much to share with the world as anyone else. And everybody deserves to have pride in who they are, especially people who have historically been shamed for for who they are. So you can see here, it's an example of a pride parade that was happening in New York City, a group of people led by a pack of wheelchair users. I really like this image. I think it shows a really good idea of, what society could be like, and celebrating our differences. Even if those differences include bad things, there's still things that you can celebrate and be proud of. And finally, disability justice, kind of building up to this after everything else I've been talking about, is a framework that looks at disability in a lens of civil rights and humanity and fairness. One very famous disability activist named Patty Byrne wrote that disability justice framework understands that all bodies are unique and essential, all have strengths and needs together. We are powerful, and not despite the complexities of ourselves, but because of them. And all bodies are confined by race, ability, gender, sexuality, class, nation state, religion, and more, and we can't separate them, which it goes into the principles of disability justice that were also created by her, as well as some other important disability activists in 2018. The first of which is intersectionality, that is talking about disability overlaps with a lot of other identities, and collaboration is a strength through that. But these are all ways that people have thought up of conceptualizing disability justice and what that means. And finally, the disability rights movement. I will not talk about the whole thing because it has been around for a very long time, but it got really popular during the 1960s, during a lot of the other civil rights movements, even though it's not really something that we learn about in school. When we learn about other civil rights movements, the disability rights activists collaborated a lot and gained traction from the other civil rights movements that were going on in the 1960s, and led to the 504 Rehabilitation Act in 1973, which was one of the first laws to address discrimination against disability. And that was great, but it didn't really have much teeth or ability to, enforce it. So people with disabilities spread really nationwide sit-ins in federal buildings, there's a whole movie about that called Crip Camp, which is also recommended at the end of this presentation, that led to even more activism. And finally, more power behind that law. And in 1990, the historic American with Disabilities Act was signed after people with disabilities came up with a really cool way of protest, where they went up to the US Capitol, took themselves out of their wheelchairs and climbed up the stairs using their arms or however they could, just to show, how do you expect us to get into a building that doesn't have a ramp? We're going to have to do this. It's just a swarm of people climbing up the Capitol stairs without their wheelchairs. And that was a very historic moment for disability rights movement as well. So now transitioning to my special focus is disability justice in health. Just like in the rest of society, discrimination against people with disabilities can impact medicine. And throughout history, that's been shown in ways such as forced sterilizations of people with disabilities, along with people of racial and ethnic minorities. Selective abortions based on disability, that's especially in cases of Down syndrome or things that you can test for. Institutionalization, which was a lot larger in the past, and like in past centuries, but also continues today in places like the Judge Rottenberg Center in Massachusetts. And within those centers and also outside, there's use of restraint and harmful therapies such as electric shock, which was recently contested in the Judge Rottenberg Center, but it was upheld by a judge. So electric shock will still be used in the Judge Rottenberg Center to treat, as they say, or to control people with disabilities. And additionally, reduced healthcare access or the termination or denial of life-saving treatment. There's a lot of different ways that disability discrimination has been evident in our medical practice today. One way is in physician attitudes. Physicians systematically underestimate the quality of life with people with disabilities, and that's something that happens in our general society as well. One historic study from 1978 had lottery winners and quadriplegics rate their life on a scale of 1 to 5 and how satisfied in their quality of life that they were. And people who were lottery winners, this was a bit after they had a little while after they had received their lottery ticket and all that, only rated their self about 1 point higher than people with disabilities, and people with disabilities were rated about the average, which totally changed what I guess sociologists thought about what the quality of life of the people with disabilities is that really people with disabilities can have wonderful and healthy, fulfilling lives that are not inherently of worse quality. But that sentiment can still continue today, where 82% of doctors believe that people with disabilities have a worse quality of life. That was a survey from 2021. And the majority of doctors are uncomfortable providing care for patients with disabilities, where only 40% of physicians believe that they can provide the same quality of care to patients with disabilities. That was from that same 2021 survey. Here you can, in the photo, you have a photo of Angel Miles. She is a PhD and a health policy analyst, and she sued a hospital for what she saw as unequal care. And she's just one of the voices here that is speaking up about health and physician attitudes. And in general, people with disabilities are affected much more and disproportionately by inaccessibility of healthcare. A third do not have a usual healthcare provider. Insurance is more likely to deny their needs for healthcare. 25% didn't have a routine health checkup. And also people with disabilities have lower average income, which can reduce their access to insurance and to healthcare options just in general, which is a really big need that can contribute to health disparities in people with disabilities. And finally, all of these risk factors lead to disproportionate rates of different diseases in people with disabilities. For example, people with disabilities are more likely to get and to die from COVID-19. So you can see in the photo here in the bottom, this is showing that in New York and Pennsylvania, people with intellectual disabilities were more likely to get COVID-19. This is from 2020. People with disabilities are 5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted and 4.6 more times more likely to have mental distress. And they have worse mental health outcomes. Additionally, people with disabilities are more likely to have kind of general health issues such as diabetes, heart disease, or obesity, or smoking. All of these things show that having a targeted disability conscious focus of medicine is something that we should be working for to target these disparities. So stemming from that need, this is the path that I'm hoping to go down, is to address that. Since I just finished my bachelor's in disability studies, I think that education has given me a really strong foundation in the principles of disability rights that are needed to face the inequalities in healthcare going forward and in healthcare access. And now I'll be going with, thanks to Rotary, to Chile, to the Universidad Católica, where I will be getting a master's in public health, which is actually the same university that I went to 2 years ago, where I got really involved in global disability justice in health. And after that, I'm hoping to become a doctor in to take care of people with disabilities myself, and also to do research about these issues, so that I can be not only someone who's like helping to describe these issues, but also a doctor who's one of the people who understands people with disabilities and is able to treat them with the understanding that they deserve. So that is my presentation. As promised, here are some of the resources that I've really benefited from in my work about disability. One of them was written by me. This is recently about insurance, Medicaid availability for people with disabilities. There's a Crip Camp movie, the Deej movie, and some other really important books. So thank you so much.
Mary, you're muted.
Well, I did my video and forgot to unmute. Sorry. Maddie, thank you so much for your presentation. And we look forward to hearing how things go in Chile as you pursue your master's. And I know that you'll be reporting back to Rotary. So we look forward to hearing that. I would like to see if anyone has any questions for Maddie. Okay. Carol?
Actually, I just want to make a comment, Maddie. I'm an audio describer. So I work, with I just got back from Pullman National Monument. I do a lot of work with the National Park Service, and they really are trying to incorporate universal design in their exhibits going forward, and really being conscious of people who use chairs, people with hearing, issues or sight issues. So I create audio tours, for the visitor centers. And you can see, if you go into a park service now, into a visitor center, so often there'll be touchable models of everything. And that originally was inspired, of course, by access for people who are blind. But, if you think about it, all of us sighted people immediately go up and start touching as well, so that's just another example of your benefit of things that you think are doing, oh, well, just doing this for this disabled, but it actually improves access for all the rest of us as well. So bravo and good luck.
Thank you so much. That's so cool. And yeah, I just wanted to say, I had kind of knew about that. I'd actually applied for a job being an audio describer before in the past that I didn't end up doing, but I just thought it was a national park audio describer. And I just thought that was so cool what they're doing with that, because I'm also a huge nature fan, and like everyone deserves to understand the beauty of nature and to experience it. So
yeah, I feel very fortunate to be able to have that work. It's great.
So Chris, you raise your hand.
Yes, I have two questions. Is there a medical specialty doctor-wise for disability, for patients for disabilities?
yes, that is a good question. You can specialize in things like neurology, where you'll focus on a lot of people with disabilities, or things like rehabilitation, or occupational therapy, where you'll be with more people who have physical disabilities, helping them to use their abilities to the best that they can to complete their lives. And there's also kind of looking at like child development and psychiatry. You can work with people with disabilities in that way. So out of all of those, I'm still not sure which one I want to do. They're all so interesting in their own ways, but those are kind of the things. Or could potentially be like my mentor in Chile, who was a doctor for a home of people with disabilities, and those were all her only patients. So
Okay.
there are some ways that I could do that.
And I just want to comment, when I was getting my master's a few years ago, lived down in near Wrightsville Beach. They had these great wheelchairs that people with disabilities that were in wheelchairs could go onto the beach, and they were great. However, you needed a truck or a van to get them from the storage unit to the beach. So even though they were providing this service, which was a great service, it was complicated. And I think a lot of things that are like that are complicated. One of the best stories that the news ever had was a lady who was dying of cancer was able to get on that and go to the beach. And she died the next day or something. But it's so amazing that they had those, and yet complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated. And I feel like that's also why it's so important to have people with disabilities in positions of leadership in those areas. Like at Duke, for example, there's this automatic door openers are really great for people with disabilities. There's this one infamous door that there's an automatic door opener, which is great. And then as soon as you step inside, there's a staircase. And it's like, why would you have an automatic door opener that opens to a staircase? Which is like, clearly, I think you should have had someone with a disability on your leadership team to help tell you how you should design that. But yeah.
Any other questions for Maddie? Rod?
Thank you, Mary. Maddie, like everyone, I just want to say thank you for your presentation. It was incredibly illuminating, and I'm so grateful for your work, and also very inspiring. I appreciate how your relationship with your brother has now taken you in this direction, which is no doubt going to impact many, many people's lives. So I'm just really inspired by what you're doing. So thank you for sharing your story and for your great work. My question for you is this: I wonder if you're familiar with the foundation, if it's FHLI, the Foundation for Health Leadership and Innovation in North Carolina. Is that an organization you're familiar with? If you like, I would be glad to make an introduction. I recently met the CEO of that organization, and FHLI is it's an organization that was created to especially address inequities in healthcare, particularly among rural and urban areas. But they've really been a leader in, I think, pushing the thinking around healthcare and people's access to it. And I think that they would really benefit from hearing your story. So if that's something that's of interest to you, if you'll just leave your contact information in the chat, I'll be glad to make that introduction, and hopefully that could lead to a conversation.
Wow, yeah, that would be so great. Thank you so much for offering that. That would be so wonderful.
Sure, be glad to. Again, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So Maddie, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so Maddie, we're very thankful for you being here today. And what we would like to do is to show our appreciation. I will be emailing you a copy of this certificate of appreciation for your presentation today to the E-Club for Social Justice. We wish you all the best. You are a bright, shining light And we're so thankful that you are involved with Rotary. And I know that you will be a great ambassador for us in Chile. And so we look forward to hearing how things are going as you progress along in your master's. And again, we wish you best of luck.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed being a part of this, and I got to go to a couple of your previous meetings as well, and coming and having the chance to talk with all of you today. It's been really awesome, and I'm just always more impressed by what Rotary can do. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And so I am going to, no, not yet. So here are the announcements that we have. On Tuesday, August 24th, Rotary 7710 Amplify Rotary. It is a public image virtual meeting from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. And on Saturday, September 18th, we have our virtual district training assembly, and we're going to be talking about the foundation. It's just an hour and a half. I would encourage all of our members to go through DACDB and to register. I think there'll be some good information shared in both of these meetings. And so I would encourage you to do that. Our upcoming meetings on August 27th, Sharon Kilpatrick is going to talk to us about the issues of aging in the LGBT community. September 10th, we have a Rotary Peace Fellow who is currently at UNC, Gabriel Bernardo da Silva, and he's going to be speaking with us about refugee assistance. And then September 24th, Melissa Radcliffe. She is with our Children's Place of Coastal Horizons Center, which is an organization advocating for children of incarcerated and returning parents. So I think we've got some great meetings. I hope everyone will be with us. Maddie, you have our login information. You are always welcome to come and join us at the meeting if some of these are of interest to you. So we welcome you to do that. And then Chris Abrams, would you please close us out with a four-way test?
A four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendship? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you so much. You all have a wonderful day. I am stopping the share and I am stopping the recording.
And